My name is Jason Goodman. I'm the founder and CEO of 21st Century 3D, and I've been shooting 3D for a long time. The very first 3D motion picture I ever shot was on black and white reversal film in 1991, but very quickly I made the transition to digital, and I've been using PROMISE technology products since the beginning. The A-Class is an absolute breakthrough in SAN storage. Instead of being a component of a SAN, it's actually a standalone unit. You don't need separate metadata controllers. You don't need a separate fiber channel switch. You just plug everything in and you're ready to go. It is ideal for on-set storage, particularly in 3D where we're dealing with 5K and potentially raw, uncompressed formats, generating tons of data. It's got the high availability, the high storage capacity, and the high performance that we want in a high-pressure on-set environment. I ran into a small technical problem with the reconfiguration of a PROMISE RAID drive not too long ago, actually, and I called PROMISE and was just blown away by the customer service. So much so that I actually, for the first time ever, called back to speak to the supervisor to let him know that the technical support representative that I had been dealing with had given me superb technical support, followed up very quickly, and figured out what was a really tricky and complicated problem.
I'm Alan Balian and I'm the CEO of Alan Balian Limited. Over the past 8 years, I've helped high fashion photographers such as Steven Meisel, David Sims, and Annie Leibovitz capture images digitally. Now that our workflow is progressing into motion, I'm also helping them migrate into the motion world. But we have to stay away from the stills workflow. A stills workflow generally has the camera attached to the computer, taking photographs, watching the images come in, and then you're backing up to most likely an external storage device, probably a single drive, and this workflow seems to work all right. But as we get into motion, it quickly becomes apparent that you need something more powerful than just a single drive attached to your system, but yet it needs to feel that easy. In a stills workflow, you'll probably collect about 60 to 100 gigabytes of information per day. When you're shooting motion, you can run a terabyte or 2 terabytes easily. And this is even before creating dailies. In the motion workflow, you're usually ingesting data as the cards come off the camera. And while you're doing this, you quickly realize that someone else would like access to the same information, whether it be a client wanting to review the footage while it's coming in, or even if we're past that step, maybe an editor needing to access the data and start to do some edits offline while you're on set to get an idea of what's been shot. The need for a shared storage solution becomes very apparent. You have different operating systems accessing the data, which we all know can be a challenge. And then you also have to share that data to other team members that are working on the same project simultaneously. And if all of your data is on a single drive connected via, let's say, a FireWire cable or eSATA cable, you're not really able to share that data or access it. So the PROMISE A-Class becomes an amazing solution for this.
Hello, my name is Chris Healer and I'm CEO of a company called The Molecule. We're based in New York and Los Angeles, and we do motion graphics, visual effects, and other bits and bobs of post-production, which creates an extraordinary need for high availability of large quantities of data. When we first started about 8 years ago, it wasn't uncommon for a TV episode to have maybe 20 shots in it. 20 visual effects shots. And that's probably HD cam, probably 8-bit. Each file uncompressed is probably 8 megabytes at 1920 by 1080. So 20 shots, all right, you've got a few hundred frames on a disk, and everybody needs to get at them, and you may work on those things for a few weeks to a month, and it was difficult. You're working on single processor machines. Gigabit Ethernet was just coming out. HDCAM was just starting to take hold of the industry at that point, and that's where we were at. Now, 8 years later, instead of doing 20 shots in 3 weeks, we do 200 shots every single week, and we do them in full floating point color space, in 4K, 5K, sometimes in stereo. Longer shots, instead of 5 people working in a room, it's 25 people working in a room. Now it's not uncommon for a TV episode to have over 200 visual effects shots, and you might have a week, 5 or 6 working days to complete that, which means you've got to get about 25 artists all in the same place, all accessing the same data, while it's rendering on some other process. Currently we have about 300 or 400 processors rendering material while 25 artists are accessing it at the same time. And frequently, once you include backplates and CG material and everything else, a particular shot might be 10 gigabytes in and 300 megabytes out. So times have changed. It's not as simple as it used to be when it was 8 megs a frame in and 8 megs a frame out, and those were the salad days, but it's a new era now. We've progressed from having local storage on each machine to having different forms of network storage using NFS, Samba, a network attached framework. And it's changed from single gigabit Ethernet to bonded Ethernet to fiber channel systems and using storage attached networks. Our thirst for high-speed access to large quantities of data is unquenchable. For what we do, it's very difficult to provide a completely homogeneous environment as far as operating system, class of machine, version of operating system, and because of all the heterogeneous elements within the system, you really need a common element to tie it all together. And what the PROMISE VTrak system provides is a storage area network where each operating system can connect in its own, using whatever drivers are necessary. And in particular, the A-Class line is very fast and very large and suits our purposes.
My name is John Keel, and I'm one of the co-founders of SoundTrak Recording Studios with Rob Cavicchio. We're 35 years old. We started in Boston 35 years ago as a jingle company, and we learned very quickly to do other things other than record music. And learning how to work with corporate voiceover work and advertising served us very well in the recent past as the music industry sort of retooled itself, let's say. We came to New York 10 years after being alive and well in Boston, where we still have studios. And we came down here to get in the music business, which we did. And we were part of the whole music scene, especially all that great R&B and rap music that got made in the 90s and early 2000. But we also found our way into the motion picture and TV industry. We started doing independent features, and then our first really big client was Sex and the City. We did the last 2 seasons of Sex and the City. When the Sex and the City account came to SoundTrak, they were in this high-pressure situation. Typically, Friday was mix day. They had 4 different sound editors who had worked all week on the dialogue, the music, the sound effects. It happened to be those years when it was a horror show. The Apple Macintosh had just changed operating systems. Pro Tools was now available on either operating system. The old operating system, people were still chauvinistic about the prior version. So there were 3 different Pro Tools versions that were floating around. The editors would use one at home. They wanted to use another one in the editing office, and they wanted to use another one on the stage. So to think if the PROMISE A-Class had been around, that whether we had Macintoshes or Windows machines or Linux machines cutting all this audio, we could just plug into one resource and everybody effortlessly talking and sharing data would be just fantastic. Soundtrack is still this tale of two cities. We have a Boston studio and a New York studio. Our Boston studio is actually a video house as well. And again, the thought of all of that data that's trying to move between literally different floors in our building in one place with one maintenance department taking care of it and editors sitting anywhere in the building having access to the video and the audio. I know audio is never thought about as a big data problem, especially compared to video, but if you're working on a feature film and you've developed 192 tracks and they're at 192 kilohertz and they're at 24-bit, that starts to be a big bandwidth. And again, PROMISE's A-Class can handle all that effortlessly.
This is Mark Anton Reed. I'm a creative director working in arts, fashion, beauty, and luxury with magazine campaigns for Vogue and Love magazine. I'm also a VFX supervisor and director and artist working on Tropic Thunder, Letters from Iwo Jima, and Harry Potter, as well as being a fine art photographer. I work with a lot of different systems that have to do with image processing, from being able to delve deep into images for fine pixel manipulation to processing large pipelines of information. And one of the things I've noticed that as we get used to working with large-scale shared networks such as storage area networks like VTrak or A-Class, we also have become greatly accustomed to that type of throughput. As far as disk arrays go, I've been working with the VTrak system for a couple of years now, and it's one of the highest performance systems I've ever used. I've worked with disk array systems since disk arrays first came out into being, and I'm extremely happy with it. The use of disk arrays in storage area networks is how we work with them. I put together the first storage area network system that was used in a non-compressed production, and I've continued to do it for several other productions. And the advantage of working with a storage area network in production is it means you can be shooting into the disk array, be grading into the disk array, be converting in the disk array if you do. If you're doing a non-compressed production, you don't need to convert at all. And you can be editing and conforming and using visual effects. The disk array in a storage area network is the center of the universe for production. With the advent of the PROMISE A-Class, the center of the universe just got more efficient, more reliable, and more compact. All of the things that used to be external to your storage area network, whether it's your metadata server storage, your metadata server redundant power, your metadata server redundant server, the fiber channel switches associated with it, the Ethernet switches, the independent network, all of these things, with the exception of the Ethernet switch, have been embedded into the A-Class itself. It's a single box that you open up the box, you plug in Ethernet and fiber channel, you type in the IP address of the A-Class, it pops up a window that allows you to download the client software to whichever operating system you're using. It can be Macintosh, PC, or Linux. You authenticate the user client from a window that can be a browser on the client computer of the A-Class, and you're in. It is that simple. We can take it to an environment, set it up, bring in entire new computers, and they're online instantly. Well, once after we set them up, you can take it into an entirely new production and bring new computers that have never seen this environment, a mixture of computers. With different cameras, we have different needs to have different operating systems and different computers around. Red cameras require Apple computers. Phantom cameras require PCs. Flame systems require Linux. All these things are being mixed together all at once. All of these systems can plug into the PROMISE A-Class at the same time. They can all be using the same data at the same time, and they can be coexisting at once, and it works out of the box.